actually has funds for medical education, mostly aimed at underserved areas and primary care, because the cost of going to medical school, as I still have loans that I'm carrying and still paying off, largely bears out with career choices, or that's the perception, that medical students come out with this debt, and why not go into an attractive field where they can have a great lifestyle personally and make a lot more money than a primary care physician in urban Washington, D.C., for example. So all of, I think, this reform around delivery system, as well as some of the loans to subsidize medical education, are aimed at pushing care in a direction for wellness and primary care.
Well, I want to thank our panelists. This was a very enjoyable session, and thanks to all of you. And next up, you're going to hear from Senator Dodd.
Senator Dodd, Dr. Bradamus, distinguished guests, it's a pleasure to welcome you all here to the Library of Congress under this magnificent members' room. It's one of the most sumptuously decorated spaces in the Library of Congress. It was originally the reading room for the House of Representatives and was equipped with reading tables, chairs, electric lamps, hat racks, bookcases, all kinds of things. And I'm glad it's now one of the most heavily used by members themselves, and it's really reserved for their use. And you're sitting between mosaics of law on the one hand, over here, and history on the other hand, and the painting on silk are the various forms of inspiration that are supposed to rain down on the members as they assembled here, always with a view of the Capitol across the way, and now with a new connection through the new Visitors Center directly into the Library of Congress. And I'm happy to say that it's very much more increasingly used by members. We're very glad that the 4th Annual Bernard and Irene Schwartz Lecture on Congress is being held here in the Thomas Jefferson Building. This grand edifice reflects the importance that the Congress placed on education and learning, and it's appropriate to thank Mr. and Mrs. Schwartz for establishing this annual lecture on the Congress, an institution which, of course, is our first branch of government, central to American life, and has been, I might add, the greatest patron of the library in the history of the world. It's a phenomenal. No royal family, no academies of science, no Medicis have ever come close to assembling the largest collection in history in all languages and formats of the world's knowledge. And thanks to Copyright Deposit being here, the closest thing we have to a mint record of America's intellectual and cultural creativity. The choice of Senator Dodd is a particularly happy one as far as everyone here in the Library of Congress is concerned, and for that matter, future generations. He's been a wonderful friend of the library, a distinguished member of Congress. The featured speaker, it suggests the importance and the seriousness of this event. When we celebrated our bicentennial as the oldest federal cultural institution in the year 2000, he came over and gave a simply marvelous talk without a single note that electrified a large group that was assembled for the event. And so the Bradamus Center is in its role as a bipartisan forum for the careful study of the Congress as a policy-making body. Congress as a policy-making body is an important and welcome addition to the world of research establishments. John Bradamus, in whose honor the center is named, is an extraordinary public servant, one who has served the Congress and the nation well, one with whom I'm happy to say I've had a very inspiring and warming personal relationship since we were graduate students together. He's as untiring, as multitask-oriented as anybody I've known, and he had, of course, a distinguished career in the service of this country, which is itself a model for young people interested in public service. He's a native of Indiana, served in the House of Representatives for 22 years, was the House Majority Whip during his last 4 years in the Congress, and while in Congress he was a member of the Committee on Education and Labor, where he helped to write major legislation in support of schools, universities, the arts and humanities, libraries, museums, children, the elderly, and the disabled. That is a menu of multitasking that's hard to beat. Leaving the Congress in 1981, he accepted the presidency of New York University, and during that time he helped to transform it into from a in many ways, from what was still a regional community school into a really national university. He's been a member of the President's Commission on the Arts and Humanities. He was chairman of it. He was the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, American Disney Foundation, National Endowment for Democracy, Rockefeller Foundation. If I read you all of these, you wouldn't have time to hear Senator Dodd, and that would be unfortunate. He's a graduate of Harvard, a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, where he received his doctorate. And ladies and gentlemen, so to introduce our wonderful speaker and great friend of many of these same causes that John is, Senator Dodd, it is my pleasure to give you the founder of this wonderful new institute and of this lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me this morning and for welcoming John Barrows.
Well, Dr. Billington, former members of the Senate and House of Representatives, and present ones too, if any happen to be around, distinguished guests and friends all, I'm deeply grateful to all of you who've come to the Library of Congress today for the event sponsored by the library and the center, which bears my name, for the study of Congress of New York University. Today we meet for a fourth in a series of lectures on Congress, lectures that bear the names of Mr. Bernard Schwartz and his wife, Irene, whose generosity has made them possible. Former chairman and CEO of Laurel Space and Communications, Bernie Schwartz has been one of the most generous and thoughtful philanthropists in the United States. And I want to voice particular gratitude for his hosting this event to one of my oldest and best friends, my former classmate from Oxford, a distinguished scholar of Russian history and the distinguished librarian of Congress, Dr. James H. Billington. Our lecturer today has a long and distinguished career in service to the people of Connecticut and the United States, legislating in areas that daily impact the lives of every American. The senior senator from Connecticut, he's long been a champion of issues important to children, forming the first Children's Caucus in the Senate. He's consistently worked to expand and enhance the Head Start program and was honored as National Head Start Senator of the Decade for his efforts. One of his greatest legacies will be writing the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993, providing job security and peace of mind to millions of Americans who have to take time off to care for a loved one. To help local committees better prepare for man-made and natural disasters, he authored legislation to help towns and cities hire, equip, and train firefighters and other emergency responders. And addressing one of the challenges posed by advances in technology, he's fought to protect people's basic right to privacy, sponsoring legislation to protect individuals' financial, medical, and genetic records. Answering John F. Kennedy's call to service, our speaker joined the Peace Corps, serving in the rural Dominican Republic village of Monción from 1966 to 1968, where he became fluent in Spanish. Debemos hablar un poco en español cuando quiere. He has been the leading champion of the Peace Corps in the United States Senate, pushing for the program's expansion to new countries such as Vietnam, and to return to previously served countries such as Haiti, as well as pushing to increase both the funding for the number of volunteers who serve in the Corps. As a senior member of the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, our speaker stepped up during the illness of his dear friend, Senator Edward Kennedy, to serve as acting chairman and help shepherd through that committee one of the three Senate bills which eventually were merged to create the health care reform law recently passed by Congress and signed into law by President Obama. Our speaker is currently chairman of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. Indeed, we're very grateful that the senator was able to take time today to join us here, even as he and his colleagues are in the midst of putting together comprehensive financial regulatory systems reform. I'm pleased to say that I had the privilege of serving in Congress with our speaker's father, the late Senator Thomas J. Dodd, and of course, I had the honor to serve with our speaker himself during his 6 years in the House of Representatives, representing Connecticut's 2nd District from 75 to 81. 1980 was a tough year for Democrats in Congress. Indeed, I myself lost my race for a 12th term in the Reagan landslide over Jimmy Carter. My friend's election to the Senate from Connecticut was one of the few bright spots for Democrats that year. After 36 years in Congress, he has announced that he will retire at the end of this year. He graciously agreed to deliver this year's Schwartz Lecture, and among other reflections from a life on Capitol Hill, will, I hope, discuss the historic health care reform legislation just passed and in which he played a key role. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to introduce to you someone I have the honor of calling former colleague and valued friend to deliver the 4th Bernard and Irene Schwartz Lecture on Congress, Senator Christopher Dodd.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for that. Those remarks are longer than my speech. That's always a danger in these things, but I thank you for those very generous remarks, and it's wonderful to be with you. And Jim, great to be back here and with you as well, and the remarkable job that Jim Billington does as our Librarian of Congress, and how you've made this institution come alive. I just love walking in the door and seeing all the people gathering, looking at the various exhibits which you put together and made this place so vibrant and alive for so many people. It was not an insignificant feat that we were able to connect the tunnels between the two buildings either, which is, we might actually get some members of Congress to come to the Library of Congress now along the way. I'm reminded, I think Jim told me the story when George Bush, President number 41, it was either Boris Yeltsin or Gorbachev, into the building to show him the building. Either Yeltsin or Gorbachev, whoever it was there, you'll correct me, turned to President Bush and said, looking at the building, look at the ceilings, and said, "You mean you did this without a czar?" Which was at a time. And in fact, we did it, I'm always reminding people, this was one of the times in a century or more ago that when this building was built by the Army Corps of Engineers. And it was built under budget and ahead of time. Another remarkable event. And I love the fact that at the time, there's so many wonderful features about this building, but at the time, how forward-thinking we were, what sense of anticipation we have, an aspiration, that even building an alcove here for a Gutenberg Bible, long before we had one, in the anticipation that one day we were going to get one. And of course, the appropriation, I think, occurred right at the height of the Depression, as Jim has told me the story. And some young enterprising reporter went to what would have been the H.R. Gross, I suppose, of Congress those days. H.R. just said no to everything, by the way. It was always a safe bet when you're in Congress, just vote no. And went up to H.R., the H.R. Gross of his time, and said, "I understand they're going to spend $1 million in the height of the Depression to buy a Gutenberg Bible. What do you think of that?" Anticipating a resounding sense of outrageousness over that kind of an appropriation. And he said he was for it, because he said, you know, we're a young country and we need to buy ourselves some monuments. And so we did, and went out and spent the money to buy the Gutenberg Bible. And thank you to Bernie and Irene Schwartz, too. Bernie's a great friend of mine personally, and I'm not surprised that he's involved in sponsoring these forums. And to John Bradamus, and again, for all of you here, this is one of my great heroes in public life is John Bradamus of Indiana. That one individual could accomplish so much in 24 years in the United States Congress ought to be a model for anyone ever seeking to come here, forever long or brief your stay is. If you can model yourself after what John Bradamus did, or tried to do on behalf not only of his state and our country, you will indeed achieve great, great significance. And John, you went on afterwards at New York University and establishing this institute to study Congress. I just applaud you for it and your contribution and your work over the years. John mentioned that I was retiring in January, which is true, and it was a tough decision, at least I thought it was while I was making it. Afterwards, it didn't seem so tough once I had made it. But someone said, "Why are you doing it?" I was struck by, someone told me a wonderful anecdote. John McCormack, the great Irish tenor, was once asked, right at the height of his singing career, why he was quitting singing. And he gave a great answer. He said, "I'd rather be asked, why are you quitting, than why haven't you quit?" And so sort of at the height of my singing career here, I'm going to try and go on and do something else. And looking out and seeing a lot of former colleagues and from the Senate and the House as well, it's a pleasure to be with you. And again, the subject matter is obviously one that occupied the attention, as John pointed out. Having served on the Health Committee for so many years, sitting next to Ted Kennedy, it was a bittersweet moment, obviously, to have this wonderful, remarkable individual at a time of his illness to turn and ask me to take on the acting chairmanship of the committee a little over a year ago to try and fulfill that committee's responsibility in putting together our portion of the health care debate. And so it was quite a journey. He obviously had teed up a lot of it by his work over the years. It was the passion of his 47 years in the Congress, the genesis of which really went back to his own son's illness, Patrick's and young Teddy's illnesses. I've often heard him tell the story that when young Teddy contracted cancer, and the treatments were limited, but they had a clinical trial going on with some experimental drugs that might make a difference. And as such, it was free to the group that was going to be going to get the benefit of this experimental drug. Halfway through the trial, they discovered that the drug worked and that it was going to actually achieve the desired results, at which point the drug was no longer free. It then became a cost. And the other families that were part of the trial, that control group, the majority of them did not have the resources to even remotely come close to paying for this drug. And it was his epiphany on the issue of health care, the idea that his child, because of their family's resources and wealth, could afford to have access to this, but other children could not, was really what fundamentally altered his view. Obviously, his own sister growing up with the mental illness, the difficulties she suffered with, was also part of that journey. And like all of us, I guess, it's not uncommon. The issues that provoke us to become involved in the debates in Congress are oftentimes motivated by our own personal experiences, what we go through individually. And certainly the issue of health care is one that we can all relate to without exception here at one point or another, either close family members or friends that go through the difficulty of encountering a health care crisis. I'm, again, going for one right now. I have a brother, Tom, who taught at Georgetown, been teaching at Georgetown for 35 years, was our U.S. taught Latin American diplomatic history for many years, and was our ambassador to Uruguay and to Costa Rica during the Clinton years administration, and went to the hospital a few nights ago. Again, it's at Georgetown Hospital. I spent all day yesterday and last evening and this morning with him up there going through a problem. I think he's going to be okay, but nonetheless, we all encounter these moments in our family lives that we go through. So discussing health care and this journey that we were on that began some 100 years ago with the administration of Teddy Roosevelt, culminating, of course, in the last few days, and hardly over with, as I'll share with you in these brief comments this morning, because this will be a never-ending conversation we're going to have as we work through these issues in the years to come. But it was a monumental event. The last time when we voted in the Senate at 7 a.m. on the morning of December 24th, Christmas Eve, the last time the Senate had voted, I'm told anyway, by historians, on December 24th was in the Civil War. We had actually met on Christmas Eve back in 1917 without voting, but the last time the Senate actually cast a vote on Christmas Eve was during the great civil conflict of our own nation. And so that day will never be the same again for those of us who were there at 7 a.m. that morning, casting a vote that allowed us to move forward with this debate. I'm very grateful to Tamar McGurkara, who's here, who worked on my staff and did a great, great job on these issues. And the Indiana delegation here will appreciate the fact that a young man by the name of Jeremy Sharp was my critical component, along with Tamar, during these last year and a half on health care. And Jeremy's father, Phil Sharp, was elected with Dan and Bob and I in the Congress there in 1974, and his dad. And so having Jeremy as part of this journey over the last year and a half was special as well. So, John, it's good to be with you, and let me just share a few thoughts, if I can, about the substance of this legislation, and then, of course, the process questions you may have some questions for as well. So I'm honored, again, to have the opportunity to be with all of you today and discuss the health care reform bill and what we've been through over the course of the legislative process. As we went through hearings and floor debates and the weeks turned into months, I'd often hear people say, this is taking forever. And I'd say, you have no idea how long forever is. This legislation really was the culmination of a century's worth of struggle on this issue. And that struggle was, from its very beginning, based on the idea that health security occupies a place of special importance in our daily lives, the lives of every single one of us. The knowledge that if you or someone in your family becomes ill or injured, you'll be able to get the care that you need and go on with your lives. That comfort should be part of what it means to live in the wealthiest nation in the history of mankind. That doesn't mean that nothing will ever happen to you, of course. In the future, it will. There's no law that we could pass that would keep people, obviously, from becoming ill with cancer or injured in automobile accidents or whatever. Although there was, I'm sure some of my colleagues would still try to filibuster if it was just on principle on that issue alone. But it does mean that no one in our country should ever expire because they couldn't afford to get well. And it does mean that no one in our country should ever become insolvent or become destitute financially because they became ill. Healthcare isn't just about your health, though. It's about the fiscal future of our nation and, of course, the fiscal ability of our families to prosper and thrive. We pay more in healthcare costs than any other nation around the world today, but we don't get the same outcomes, despite the Herculean efforts of our healthcare providers all across the country. And our hospitals do incredible work. There are better outcomes that we ought to be receiving for the amount that we invest in the cause. And if we had allowed healthcare costs to continue to skyrocket, as I'm sure all of you know now as a result of this debate, our current deficits would soon have become a gaping chasm from which we might not be able to emerge. And with healthcare costs consuming more and more of corporate and family budgets, it's safe to say that the healthcare crisis was really an economic crisis, both individually and collectively for families, as well as a national economic crisis looming. Half of all bankruptcies are related to healthcare costs, regardless of whether or not you have insurance or not. Put simply, middle-class families in our country cannot have economic security without health security, and they have not had that for a long time indeed. The way it is supposed to work is this. You pay an insurance company a fee, and then you are insured, not against sickness, but against ruin, if in fact you do become ill. But we all know that's not exactly how it works in reality. Countless Americans with insurance face annual or lifetime caps on benefits, forcing them to pay out of pocket or go into debt to get the treatment that they desperately need. And of course, you have all heard horror stories about people who had their claims denied or their care cut off or terminated. And even if you've been lucky enough to avoid becoming one of these stories yourselves, I'll bet that if I asked everyone in this room here gathered to raise your hands if you had spent time haggling with an insurance company over what you thought your policy covered, there'd be a sea of hands, regardless of economic circumstances. In fact, I can raise my own. Having gone through prostate cancer surgery last August in the midst of all of this, I discovered, despite getting pre-approvals twice before the surgery, that I'm now in my fourth appeal with my insurance company.